everybody. I hope you're keeping safe and well, and it's wonderful to be able to join you all here virtually, if not in your actual company. So by my main profession now is that I am an actor, and obviously all of the theatres are currently closed. And to my mind, I can't think of a time in modern history where this has been the case, at least for a prolonged period of time. And my specialism is Shakespeare. I'm a Shakespearean actor, and I also am particularly interested in the magical content of Shakespeare. I'm writing a book about that at the moment. And so when I think about a virus closing the theatres or the playhouses, I immediately go back to Shakespeare's time, and so have a lot of other people at the moment. There's an awful lot of Shakespeare out there. It's very interesting that in these challenging times that Shakespeare still speaks to us and is still a source of comfort and of inspiration. And Shakespeare can also be a source of inspiration to us in our magical paths. Shakespeare was writing at a time of great flux, the political and the spiritual climate around the time when Shakespeare was writing. So the turn from the 16th to the 17th centuries, the shift. He began writing in the Elizabethan era and then into the Jacobean era was a period of enormous change in our society. In modern science, as we now know it, began to emerge and separate from its mother philosophies, which were the occult philosophies. The Elizabethan age was very much time when alchemy, astrology, hermeticism were at the forefront, and that through Shakespeare's life shifted to the more humanist beliefs of the Jacobeans, and his contemporaries, his university-educated contemporaries, such as Marlowe and Johnson, were embracing the new perspective, and Shakespeare seems very much to have clung to the old perspective, to the old occult philosophies, and also to the folklore and magic that he presumably was steeped in growing up. So if you look at his plays, for example, the symbolism of the Winter's Tale, you go beyond the source material there of Pandosto, the play on which it's based. But if you look at the symbolism that Shakespeare has wrought into his version of this story, then there are echoes there of the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece. And you can see reflections in there of the Hermetic text, Asclepius. In The Merchant of Venice, there's much Kabbalistic wisdom, which is only appropriate for a play which centres around a Jewish main character. And though many people refer to Shylock as a villain, in fact, if you actually read the text, it's really not black and white, and he paints human beings. The Christian characters in that are at least as villainous as Shylock's behaviour in places. We have the most obvious magical plays, such as A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is full of the most wonderful fairies and fairy lore. You have The Tempest and its alchemical journey and elemental symbolism. And of course you have Macbeth and its famous three witches, who interestingly in the original source material and in the earliest versions, which are perhaps now lost, but from reports of the time of audience members watching Shakespeare's play, these were not originally witches at all, but actually nymphs of the forest. These were fairy beings. And if you look at the play, going off slightly on a tangent here, but bear with me, but if you look at a copy of the play, the only mention of witches, other than you can see the characters are listed as witches, But the only time anybody actually refers to them as witch is when one of the witch characters says that she's been called witch as an insult. When a woman has refused to give her something that she's asked for, and she says, "Anoint thee, witch," to which she wreaks vengeance. And the qualities that they manifest are not those of any other witch-like character that you'll see in Shakespeare's plays. They're very much supernatural beings, which is very interesting. But there are many layers of meaning and symbolism to explore in Shakespeare's plays, a lot of hidden wisdom. And with the overt references, there's a lot of hidden references. So there will be tragic events that are foretold by prophecy. There's obviously herbalism. Sometimes herbs are used as a curse, sometimes as a cure. And there are many gods and goddesses that are called upon, and even full invocations found within Shakespeare's work. So this is all different areas that I've written about in the book that I'm currently just working on editing at the moment, which eventually will be out there. But for the purposes of today and our focus specifically on magic and magical practice, then I'd like to look at specifically some of the hermetic content that's in Shakespeare's plays, and also some of the invocations that we might find in there if we have time. The hermetic philosophy, with its three main strands of astrology, alchemy and theurgy, is ultimately concerned with uniting the divine, or uniting with the divine and the interconnection of all things. So to practice hermeticism is to seek to perfect the soul, so that there's no further need to reincarnate on earth, to come into physical incarnation. And Shakespeare was writing at a time when the language of the planets, the elements and alchemical transformation was readily understood by most people at a standard level of education. And so he was writing bawdy jokes for the groundlings. He was also writing these deeper esoteric meanings behind characters and stories for those with the eyes to see or the ears to hear them. And so these philosophies may not be so well known now amongst the general population, but we do have access to those teachings if we choose to seek them out. The most famous quote perhaps in Hermeticism is from the Emerald Tablet, which says, one small extract from it says, "That which is above is from that which is below, and that which is below is from that which is above." And that's popularly simplified today as above, so below. This is one of the best known tenets of Hermetic philosophy, and that endures as a universal truth to this day. It's probably the simplest way to sum up occult philosophy and the function of theurgic magic in one sentence, if you needed to do such a thing. And the most obvious application of this is, of course, astrology. This is the influence of the planets on human behaviour and characteristics and the larger events in the world. And Shakespeare often refers to this starry wisdom, and maybe we can extrapolate something of Shakespeare's own beliefs from the moral and intellectual character of those who respect or mock these principles. For example, in King Lear, there's a big difference between how Gloucester is portrayed and his belief in astrology, and his bastard son Edmund, the supposed baddie of the piece, who mocks Gloucester's belief. And yet the events that Gloucester speaks about when he's talking about eclipses and what they portend, the events that he predicts there come true during the course of the play, which seems to point towards a belief that these things are true, and that not only Edmund's mocking of these beliefs, but also his proven immoral character show where Shakespeare sides in this argument. He was writing at a time when the older generation was being mocked for their beliefs, and he seems to be in defence of those beliefs. And this is, of course, just one example, and there are many references to the planets and planetary influences throughout Shakespeare's works. But another way in which he gives us an idea that he may see magic in a more positive light than his contemporaries is through his portrayal of magicians themselves. If we look at Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, we're given a powerful magician who is only interested in serving his own ends and ultimately pays the price for that, with his soul being damned to hell. So it's shown there that magic will be punished. And in Ben Jonson's The Alchemist, we see an out-and-out mockery of magicians, and it is thought that that was specifically a dig at John Dee, who was famously Elizabeth I's astrologer, and who was famed and prized for a while, and then unfortunately died in poverty and obscurity. But Shakespeare, on the other hand, gives us Prospero, and he also gives us various other figures throughout his plays, the late plays in particular, who might be thought of as magicians. The Winter's Tale, for example, gives us this lovely quote: "If this be magic, let it be an art lawful as eating." And I wonder whether that's Shakespeare's own voice there talking to us. These were the most overtly magical of Shakespeare's plays towards the end of his life, and I suppose he thought he had little left to lose. People were, after all, in Europe losing their lives at this point for speaking and practicing these philosophies. We have, in Shakespeare's plays, however, we have the wise Chaeremon in Pericles, we have Paulina in The Winter's Tale, and we have the most famous of his magicians, Prospero, in The Tempest. And we should also consider Cymbeline here, where we have an extraordinary appearance of the god Jupiter when he is called upon. And there are overall themes in Cymbeline. It's a very strange play, but there are overall themes there which do seem to encompass an initiatory journey. There's some very bold statements there, considering that these were written during the reign of James I, who was very devout and wrote his own anti-witchcraft treatise. But it does seem that during that reign in particular that Shakespeare was very nostalgic for Elizabeth's reign. And there was a movement at the time that was hoping that James's son and heir, Henry, would bring about a new golden age similar to the Elizabethan age when he took the throne. But unfortunately that was not to be, because he died in 1612, 18 years old, of typhoid fever, which is incredibly tragic. And Shakespeare's last play that we know of is dated 1613. So perhaps, I'm only theorising wildly here, but maybe he stopped writing at that point, only because of perhaps ill health or retiring back to the countryside, but perhaps he just lost hope. But within these last plays, these late plays, there is a multi-layered tapestry of magic and initiatory systems, as if Shakespeare's trying to convey secrets that he's learned through years of study and experience to his audiences. There are details in there which diverge in significantly magical ways from his source material. Now, when the first folio was published in 1623, these late plays, they were categorised alongside the comedies and the tragedies, but they don't really fit those categories, so sometimes we will refer to them as the romances. So in Pericles, it's like Act 3 of Pericles, Thaisa's coffin is washed up on the shore of Ephesus after a terrible storm, and she was thought to have died in childbirth. So she was thrown off the side of the boat, which is terribly tragic. But she's washed up on the shore in Ephesus and is found by Chaeremon, who is a physician of the town. And he just blatantly states that he practices hermetic arts. he says, "Virtue and cunning were endowments greater than nobleness and riches. Careless airs may the two latter darken and expend, but immortality attends the former, making a man a god. 'Tis known I ever have studied physic, through which secret art, by turning o'er authorities, I have, together with my practice, made familiar to me and to my aid the blessed infusions that dwell in vegetatives, in metals, stones, and I can speak of the disturbances that nature works, and of her cures, which doth give me a more content in course of true delight, than to be thirsty after tottering honour, or tie my treasure up in silken bags to please the fool and death." He's very blatantly saying this may not be, people might not think this is great, but I know that this is the way to wisdom and the way to live a true life. And this is a character who is completely honourable throughout the play. There's no mockery or there's no sinister edge to this character. He portrayed this magician character as being a thoroughly decent chap. And he uses music to bring Thaisa back to life. Or if we think that, okay, so perhaps she wasn't dead, she's just deeply in a coma or unconscious, he uses music and sings her back to awareness. And these learnings seem to be based on principles which you might find in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy or in Paracelsus. And if that's not enough to convince you, her first words upon awakening are of the goddess Diana, Shakespeare's favourite goddess. She appears an awful lot in Shakespeare's works. And then Thaisa instantly devotes herself to Diana in the temple. And Chaeremon ends that scene with the words, "And Asclepius guide us." So this, perhaps he's got his knowledge and his learnings from the book of Asclepius, from the Hermetic books. And there's obviously parallels to be drawn here between this scene and Hermione's resurrection in The Winter's Tale. Now, Shakespeare's source for the story of The Winter's Tale, which is Pandosto by Robert Greene, in the original source material, the queen dies after being accused of adultery, and the king kills himself from remorse when he realises his error. So if you know The Winter's Tale, if not, perhaps go do your research, go do your reading, or watch production, even better. But at the end of The Winter's Tale, this incredibly beautiful magical scene where Hermione, who was thought to have died 16 years later, the King Leontes, who has caused this through his terrible jealousy, is presented with a statue by a very priestess-like character called Paulina, who very much is a figure of truth and justice. And this statue is brought to life. And once again, a modern audience, and even in fact in Shakespeare's time, there's hints that, this may not be a true act of magic in the sense that Paulina's obviously kept Hermione hidden for these 16 years. But there's so much magical symbolism in there that the underlying story is mythic. It's giving us mysteries. It's telling us mysteries. So although we suspect that when they come across the statue and they say, "Oh, she's more wrinkled than she was," Paulina has these wonderful little throwaway lines as, "Oh, so much more our carver's excellence," which lets go by some 16 years and makes her as she lived now. But she also says that we must awake our faith so that magic can move our souls the way that it's intended to. We have to be active and willing participants in this process. And the the rite itself, the awakening of the statue itself, very much appears to be inspired by a passage from the Hermetic book of Asclepius, in which the ancient Egyptian practice of the ensoulment of statues is mentioned. And this connection seems even stronger. Now, whether this is a coincidence or not, I can't say, but the name Hermione really does seem to have resonance with the divine name Haimamene, a goddess of fate, which is mentioned in the teachings of Asclepius. Obviously, there are many other sources for the name Hermione, but it's not dissimilar. So, whether we believe that Paulina wields genuine magical powers that might be considered beyond usual human knowledge, that's ambiguous. But again, she uses music to alter consciousness. Her wisdom in keeping Leontes and Hermione separate until the correct time, and her sage counsel to Leontes throughout, shows that she understands the alchemical nature of transformation and how to harness it. The multi-layered mythological and magical nature of the Winter's Tale is undeniable. So you can chart the alchemical journey through it. There are various stages of alchemical transformation, which we don't really have time today to go into in depth. But if you think about the story essentially being the king accuses his queen of sleeping with his closest friend, he is revealing these faults within himself which need to be purged. There's constant separations and supposed deaths and things being purified and being removed and then coming back together again, which very much reflects the alchemical process. You know, you want to know about this in depth? Buy my book when it comes out. It's all in there. A little bit of a preemptive plug there. It'll be a while yet, because the publishing industry is also in array, but also because I have been so busy with acting work until now. It's taken me a while. So the book is finished, but it's just in the editing process right now. But in the end of the Winter's Tale, the Queen is restored to life. You know, everybody's getting married. Everything's marvellous, apart from the fact that her son is still dead. Couples are brought together. Everybody's given a partner, and it's mostly a lovely, happy ending. But you've gone through a very mysterious, magical journey in the meantime. There's another level of mystery within this play, beyond the alchemical. As she's got, Paulina, our magician, has got no fear of standing up to the King Leontes, and she's very much a psychopomp. She goes between the world of the court and the outer world, wielding her own seemingly independent authority wherever she goes. She's the protectress of Hermione over many years, and in the initiatory rite, which is represented by this play, then Paulina can be very clearly seen to stand for the goddess Hecate and her role within the Eleusinian mysteries, this ancient tradition of death and resurrection based upon the myth of Persephone. I'm never in any doubt about this. Well, there's one thing, this is titled The Winter's Tale. It's far less mysterious when we realise this play is a retelling of the myth which tells how winter came to be. Hermione is Demeter, very clearly, and Perdita, which means lost, is Persephone. And to completely clarify this for us, Shakespeare actually has Perdita mention her mythological equivalent in her very first scene, and Proserpina being the Roman name for Persephone. She says, "O Proserpina, for the flowers now that frighted thou lett'st fall from Dis's wagon." So the flowers that Perdita's gathering and handing out are the same types of flowers that it was said that Proserpina was picking when she was taken by Hades. As far as we know, the Eleusinian mysteries involved a resurrection mystery, and there are also other characters in the Winter's Tale, including Autolycus, who says that he was littered under Mercury, who may represent figures known in the mysteries. But coming back to talking about Paulina as a magician, it's interesting to note that even if the awakening of the statue was not in the context of the play A Genuine Act of Magic, there is still the need for music. She commands music. And if we look at the most famously magical of Shakespeare's plays and his most famous magician, Prospero, then music plays a really important part there as well. As the magic that Prospero works, he works through his conjured spirit, Ariel. And the music is the chief means by which Ariel manipulates the people that he's been given orders to cause mayhem but not only that, but the isle itself has an innate music. It's an innate quality of the isle. As Caliban, the one native resident of the isle, says, "Be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometime voices that, if I then had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then, in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that, when I waked, I cried to dream again." Just as music brings Thaisa back to life and Pericles back to sanity, actually, in Pericles, the songs of Ariel can distract, they can provoke, they drive people insane, or they can evoke deep cathartic remorse and grief. The innate ability of music to alter states of human consciousness is a parallel it's a parallel within both magic and theatre. If we look at one of Shakespeare's likely sources and one of the best known occult books of the time, Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, music is mentioned in there. It says, Agrippa says, "Musical harmony also is not destitute of the gifts of the stars, for it is the most powerful imaginer of all things, which, whilst it follows opportunely the celestial bodies, doth wonderfully allure the celestial influence, and doth change the affections, intentions, gestures, motions, actions, and dispositions of all the hearers, and doth quietly allure them to its own properties, as to gladness, lamentation, to boldness, or rest." Another aspect which can be applied to Shakespeare's plays, but particularly magical plays like The Tempest, is the Kabbalah. This was very much part of the occult philosophy at the time, after the Jews were exiled and their wisdom spread to Europe, and then the Christians adopted it and Christianized it, as they do. But one of the things that the renowned expert in the mystery content of Shakespeare and who teaches this sort of thing, Peter Dawkins, does is he places characters from Shakespeare's plays on the Tree of Life, and although that's not something that's necessarily there inherent in the text, it's an interesting exercise to do. So, for example, you can take the characters from The Tempest and place them on the tree. So, for example, look at Malkut Kingdom, you might want to place Caliban there, very strongly associated with the element of earth and base of qualities, constantly described as being base of qualities. But he's also the inheritor of the earthly natural wisdom of the isle, and he doesn't wish for anything more than that. Well, perhaps he does wish for it, but he's not capable of ascending beyond that sphere. He dreams of riches, but he's always brought back to earth. Noel Cobb, in his really wonderful book, Prospero's Island, which I highly, highly recommend, he compares Caliban to Merlin. He says he's a kind of demigod of the forests. Although he doesn't actually possess magical powers of transformation, intuition and enchantment, he resembles, at least in one respect, the archetypal Celtic wizard shaman Merlin in his manifestation as the Ward of the Wood. So Caliban is like Prospero's dark shadow, and Prospero must integrate Caliban, which he does at the end of the play, where it's Prospero's process to forgive and to integrate. This is estranged and immoral brother Antonio, who had betrayed him. He must forgive. It's not necessary for Antonio to accept that, but it's part of Prospero's important process to forgive Antonio, but also to accept Caliban and claim him for himself. He says, "This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine." And if you place Caliban in Malkuth, that puts him directly below where Prospero would be positioned, which is at the heart of the tree in Tiferet, because all of the events of the play revolve around him and his choices and his actions and his journey. So just above Malkuth in the tree you have Yesod, or foundation, which I consider to be the island itself. I feel that the island in The Tempest is a character in its own right. The island reflects and obeys Prospero, and it's as fitting for a sphere which is ruled by the moon. It's a place of illusion. It's a place of the subconscious, where the land reflects the inner landscape of the self. And perhaps we might also place Sycorax in this Sephira, who was described as being one so strong that could control the moon. So directly connected to the moon there. She was also described as being bent over or hoop-shaped, so even her physical shape was crescent-like. Then we move on to Hod, or Splendour. Now Hod is ruled by Mercury, so this very clearly is the Sephira of Ariel, because Ariel represents the alchemical Mercurius and is the spiritual servant of Prospero. Ariel is a very mercurial character. Netzach, Victory. Venus is the ruler of this sphere, and so it seems obvious that we could place the young lovers there. And in Tiferet, the centre, which is ruled by the sun, here we have, as I've already mentioned, Prospero, around which all the action revolves. And he also then reflects the divine light of Keter. Gevura, Strength, the sphere of Mars. Here we can place all of the opposing, aggressive forces. So Antonio, Sebastian, and initially perhaps Alonso, the King of Naples, who did enable and encourage Antonio's ousting of Prospero from Milan. But through the course of the play he's transformed, and then we can move him to Hesed. So Hesed is the sphere of mercy, the Sephira of Jupiter. So there we put Gonzalo. He's a merciful and compassionate character. He demonstrates patience, kindness, empathy, wisdom. Because of Gonzalo's kindness, Prospero is able to take his books from Milan to the island, and there that enables the whole plot. And then in Bina, Understanding, we have Naples itself. That's where I've placed Naples. Along with the king, it's brought into harmony through the course of the play. So opposite that Hokma, the sphere of wisdom, we can place Milan, the wisdom to which Prospero is able to return to balance. And then above all of these, unseen, we have Keter, the crown. This is very difficult because Keter is an unknowable divine source, so we can either leave it unknowable and place nothing there, perhaps naming it as the spiritual source from which Prospero draws his power, Or perhaps we can name it as Miranda's mother. We never hear anything about her, other than the fact that she's a piece of virtue. Well, now here's a different option though, a bit of a wildcard option. We can place the audience there. And Prospero breaks the fourth wall completely in the epilogue of the play and directly appeals to the audience to set him free. So, is this the imagination of the audience, or is this the source of his power all along? Then, of course, there's the mysterious 11th Sephira, Dart, or knowledge. Here we can place Prospero's books. What are Prospero's books? What are the sources of his magic? Perhaps they are Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. But also, perhaps they are the works of John Dee. It's very likely that Shakespeare himself would have known Dee, and that he may have even had access to Dee's library. There has naturally been lots of comparisons made between Prospero and John Dee. As we've said, he was Elizabeth's favourite astrologer, he was a navigator, he was a mathematician, and he was a magician. And it seems very likely that Dee's fall from grace, and as again I've already mentioned, his eventual death in poverty in 1608, would have been a large influence on the writings of Shakespeare's final play, The Tempest, in 1610. It has been said that Prospero may represent Shakespeare himself, and that the breaking of Prospero's staff and drowning of his book is symbolic of Shakespeare putting down his quill and writing no more. Well, this does ring true, and if so, it seems likely that Shakespeare related to Dee on a profound level. The wonderful author Frances Yates, to whom we're all incredibly indebted, any of us who work in this area, she's written many wonderful books on the subject of the occult philosophy in the time of Shakespeare, and she observed that the magic that Prospero practices was quite different from the other magicians that we've already spoken about in Shakespeare's late plays, Chaeremon and Paulina. Frances Yates says, of the 2 branches, Magia and Kabbalah, set out in Agrippa's Handbook of Renaissance Magic, Prospero would seem to use mainly the Kabbalistic conjuring magic rather than the healing magic of Chaeremon, or the profound natural magic which pervades the Winter's Tale. This fundamentally connects him to the methods that Dee was known for. But might the others not also have some connection? After all, they were written at a time when Shakespeare may have been trying to show the beneficent nature of magic, fighting the tide that was turning against the old occult practices. Chaeremon's Paracelsian healing fits with Dee's philosophy of interconnectedness, and Paulina and her theatrics have a direct connection, because in Dee's early career he was involved in theatre design, in design for theatre. He created wonders that were so marvellous he was accused of conspiring with devils to achieve impossible effects. Most famously, in 1547, he created a huge beetle which was large enough for a man to ride, which was brought to life and flown out across the audience. And this must have been an incredible thing to witness. It'd be pretty amazing now. We don't know how he achieved this, but he maintained it was purely mathematics. He believed that mathematics and science, as he was really inventing, at the time, could achieve miracles and bring you closer to God that way, closer to divinity. These apparent miracles, the animating of the inanimate with a hidden rational explanation, really takes us back to Paulina and her resurrection of Hermione, or her supposed resurrection of Hermione. But does that mean if there's a non-magical explanation beneath it, is it really any less magical if the intended effect is the same, if the wonder and transformation that is rendered through it is the same? Both magic and theatre are forms of art, and they're both branches of the same tree, with roots in the enaction of the mysteries of ancient Greece. Magic and theatre's most profound effect is within the self, the purpose of which is initiation and connection with the divine. Shakespeare totally understood this, and in the last words of his last play, he gives us the key by which we may unlock this mystery. That process requires us, as Paulina requested, to awake our faith. We must believe in the magic and be active participants, or we will not be transported and transformed. Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardoned the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands, with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself, and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. And to finish with, because I think I mentioned that I would talk a little about invocation. It's actually a huge area, and we have so little time to touch on any of the many aspects of magic which can be found in Shakespeare's work. But while we're talking about Prospero and the Tempest, I think the most famous of the invocations to be found within Shakespeare's work is the wonderful Ye Elves of Hills, Brooks, Standing Lakes and Groves speech, where he's calling upon the spirits of the land, and then talks of the various things that he's achieved through his magic and calls them to witness the fact that he is going to leave that behind, which is sort of Shakespeare's conciliatory gesture towards the orthodoxy, saying, yeah, well, okay, he's doing this magic, but he's doing it for good things, and then, okay, fine, he's going to give it up. I like to think that maybe Prospero says he's going to break his stuff and drown his book, but I don't think he necessarily... Maybe he goes back and fixes them afterwards. I'd like to think that that the magic lives on, and I feel that somehow it does. But I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent now. So Prospero's invocation to the spirits of the land in Act 5 is almost it's completely inspired by one of Shakespeare's known favourite sources, which is Ovid, and we can see direct parallels with Medea's invocation to Hecate. So I'm going to just, if you don't mind indulging me, I'd like to read you both of these in turn so that you can see the similarities, and then I think we'll have to leave it there. So Shakespeare's speech that he gives to Prospero. Ye elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune, and do fly him when he comes back. You demi-puppets, that by moonshine do the green sour ringlets make, whereof the ewe no bites, and you, whose pastime is to make midnight mushrooms, that rejoice to hear the solemn curfew, by whose aid, weak masters though ye be, I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vault set roaring war. To the dread rattling thunder have I given fire, and rifted Jove's stout oak with his own bolt. The strong-based promontory have I made shake, and by the spurs plucked up the pine and cedar. Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, oped, and let 'em forth by my so potent art. Now I'm going to stop that there because that's where the similarity ends. And let's look at Medea's invocation to Hecate from Metamorphoses. Night, most faithful keeper of our secret rites, stars that with the golden moon succeed the fires of light, triple Hecate, you who know all our undertakings and come to aid the witch's art and all our incantations, you earth, who yield the sorcerous herbs of magic force. Now this is where some of the similarities come in. You, airs and breezes, pools and hills, and every watercourse, be here. All you gods of night and gods of groves endorse. Streams, at will, by banks amazed, turn backwards to their source. I calm rough seas and stir the calm by my magic spells. Bring clouds, disperse the clouds, raise storms and storms dispel, and with my incantations I break the serpent's teeth, and root up nature's oaks and rocks from their native heath, and move the forests, and command the mountain tops to shake, earth to groan, and from their tombs the sleeping dead to wake. And it goes on. I just find it really interesting that Shakespeare chooses this priestess's invocation to Hecate and just rejigs it a little and puts it into his final play. And Hecate is a goddess who appears, who literally appears in Macbeth, but also is mentioned a number of times throughout the plays. And of course, as I've already mentioned, he loved the goddess. Certainly loved mentioning the goddess Diana in his works, and this lunar energy that is often called upon. So there are many forms of magic in Shakespeare's plays. We've looked very briefly at some of his magical practitioners that appear in his plays and the kinds of magic that you might find there. But of course there's the witches, there's ghosts, there's magic in the history plays. So when you next look at Shakespeare plays, perhaps try and look for this magical content, but also think about how you can, if you wish, incorporate this into your own practice. Is there aspects of these invocations or prayers that you might wish to use in ritual? Or even if you start to look at it from a more chaos magic or postmodern magic perspective, would you perhaps want to call upon the qualities of any of Shakespeare's characters? They're so archetypal and they've been such a part of our culture for such a long time. Is there something there that you can draw upon? And these are interesting things to explore. And so I think the thought that the possible practical thing actually to leave you with in terms of bringing this into more relevance to today in your magical practice, the powerful way that Shakespeare wrote really lends itself to ritual magic and to invocations, and that's partially down to his use of iambic pentameter. So I'd really encourage you to consider using this rhythm in writing your rituals. Most of his invocations are written in iambic, so this means that it's not this great mysterious thing. All it means is that there's 10 beats per line and there's an off stress rhythm, like so. O God of battle, steel my soldiers' hearts. It's like a horse beat. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. This rhythm echoes the beat of our own hearts. it carries the truth of our hearts. When we hear somebody speak in this rhythm, it feels familiar and sincere to us for this reason. And heart speaks to heart. You don't need to overemphasize, like I was doing there just to show the rhythm to you. You don't need to overemphasize the beat. But with the breath at the beginning of each line and taking the time to speak with clarity, then the energy will carry through. Giles Block, who's the master of words at the Globe, at least he was when I was there, describes it as our secret rhythm, not one which the audience is really conscious of, but one which, beating in time with the audience's own hearts, subliminally creates a sympathetic bond between audience and actor. So when you combine this rhythm with resonating your voice, this can be immensely powerful in ritual. You think of the rhythm as being the hooves of the horses of a chariot, which may carry your words to the gods. And so that is the thought that I'm going to leave you with. But thank you very much. I hope that there was something interesting in there for you. And many blessings to you all. And please do stay safe. Take care.